Action figure reboots. Sponsored by Pearson Art.
Hello, and welcome back. Today we're looking at a childhood favorite of mine, and that would be the Wish Book. Department stores used to put these out every Christmas season, and they were awesome. They were like the Amazon of its day. They had something for everybody. Groovy clothes for the guys and gals, sports apparel, like mostly all the fun stuff. I guess there was appliances, things like that. I don't really remember looking at it because what they had most importantly was toys. And plenty of them. Pages of them, in fact. Something for everybody. And they were all boss. Well, maybe not all of them. Thanks for the nightmares. These were usually released between late August, early September. I remember these used to come out around back to school time. So I'm a little late with this, but that's all right. We used to get the Sears catalog, but my friend around the corner, he got a different one. And I remember this one particular page. This is actually a great example of the crazy stuff they used to do for wish books back then. I mean, just look at the collage. Look at how crazy that is. And they got all the Mego figures lined up, all ready to be ordered. And even the way they used to set up play sets for these photo shoots, they never looked as good on your ping pong table in your basement as they did on the pages of these wish books. The picture of this Batcave is actually pretty mellow. They made some look just great. But anyway, the reason why I remember this page so clearly is because of what was in the right hand corner. What were these figures? I never saw anything like it. Not in the stores. Bruce Wayne, Dick Grayson, Clark Kent, Peter Parker? Wow, far out. But it turns out what these things were back then were catalog or wish book exclusives, meaning that you could only get them through the catalog. You couldn't even get them in the regular store, only through the catalog. So that was pretty beat. I never got these, and I never knew anybody who did. So for years afterwards, I wondered what it was all about, especially Peter Parker. In the picture, you could see that it's actually an Aquaman head wearing an Action Jackson spy suit. Just a mock up, I guess, but for years afterwards, I wondered what that figure looked like. I also wondered about the Bruce Wayne and the Dick Grayson. Did they come with the cowl and the mask? And it was actually years later that I found out. No, Virginia, they didn't come with a cowl or a mask. In fact, these figures didn't even come with a body. They just came in a cellophane pack in a cardboard box. I don't know. I might have been kind of miffed as a kid if I got something like that. The cowl and the mask were actually the selling point. They didn't make those anymore, so it would have been kind of cool to get a set of them. I will say, out of all the figures they did, I think the Peter Parker came out the best. I knew that they weren't going to use an Aquaman head even back then, but I wondered which head they used. It turns out it was just a repainted Shazam head. Kind of lazy, but I think it's a much better Peter Parker than it ever was a Shazam. The reason why I'm talking about all this is because it's Wishbook season, and it got me thinking that it might be a cool new segment to introduce. Wishbook or catalog exclusive. I like Wishbook exclusive personally, where I put together a figure that maybe was never done or could have been added to a lineup and wasn't. And it wouldn't have to be a figure, it could be a play set, a vehicle, something along those lines. And we'll just call them Wishbook exclusives. So for my first one, this is one that I've been wanting to put together for years, and that would be the Shadow. I was always a fan of this character, even when I didn't know a lot about him. I mean, he had a cool name, he had a really awesome design. And this was a figure that Mego could have done back in the day. In 1973, DC Comics gave the Shadow his own book. and that ran until 1975. So the timeline kind of adds up. I remember this book, and what was pretty cool was my father was a big fan of The Shadow. So it was kind of a generational thing. He used to listen to him on the radio, which was pretty cool. But as much as I loved this character, I never really thought you could do one in this scale, only because there's really no good hats. When it came to headgear, Mego didn't really have a great repertoire. They did have this jungle safari hat for Action Jackson, and they did make a Cowboys and Indians line, but none of the cowboy hats would have really worked. A Clark Kent hat from the aforementioned Secret Identity set might have worked for Mego, but not for me. Besides, a Clark Kent hat is worth considerably more than a custom Shadow hat. So that was a no go. So there's really no hats you could use for this character, I thought. And then I remembered something from my youth. Back in the 70s, there was a detective show called Kojak. It starred Telly Savalas, and it was a dark and gritty police drama. It showed the dark underbelly of 1970s New York. Not really kid friendly. I never watched it at the time because I was always in bed. But that didn't stop a little company called Excel from making a Kojak action figure. Yes, a Kojak action figure. That's not Photoshop. That was a real thing. They really went all in on this concept. In addition to the figure, they gave him his own office playset and a bad guy, the whole Megillah. This figure also came with accessories: sunglasses, a police revolver and holster, lollipops and cigar, what every crime fighter needs, and a hat. Of course, it really didn't fit the Kojak figure very well because removable hats or cowls or masks, helmets, it never really works. But since this figure was 9 in scale, I thought it would have a pretty good chance of fitting a Mego head. This is the hat right here. This isn't mine. I just took this off the internet because I thought it was a pretty good picture of it. So if you ever see one of these at a toy show or a flea market, it's a Kojak hat. Now, the bad news is that it's blue, but the good news is that it's rubber, and sometimes rubber can be dyed, like this. The reason I wanted to get this Kojak hat is because the design that I want to use for this figure is from the 1994 movie. As far as imagery, I always thought this film was aces. Really cool Art Deco set pieces, but what I liked most of all was the costume. It was a pretty simple design, brilliant in its simplicity, and there really wasn't much to it: a hat, a scarf, a double breasted trench coat, a cape, not much at all. And I think this hat would be perfect for this version. So we have the hat, now the scarf. I mention the scarf because it has been drawn or painted in different ways over the years. He's even been known to not even have one. So even though it may look cool, I don't really think it's that practical. So instead, I'm going to go with something like this. I actually prefer this to a scarf. Just a face covering. That's fine. And there is precedence, I guess. So instead of a scarf, I just have this. This is just a hem from a pair of red pants. I just cut this piece off. I didn't really like the material that it was in, so I turned it inside out. So now we have the hat and the scarf. Now, what do we use for the head? Over the years, depending on the artist, the hats, the scarf, the coat, the cape, the suit, all those things may have changed. But the one thing that remained constant was the way he looked. That hasn't changed since 1931. The broad nose, the cheekbones, the eyebrows, that's the way he's always looked. So I looked at a bunch of heads, and then I think I finally found the perfect one. And it was right under my nose, and I discovered it by accident. And that would be the Mego Klingon. I thought it was an odd choice at first, but looking back on it now, it's actually perfect, I think. So I put the three pieces together: the hat, the scarf, and the head, and this is what I came up with. Really happy with this one. I think this head is actually perfect for this character. The nose, the eyebrows, the cheekbones, everything. And with the hat and the scarf, you're actually covering up what makes him look like a Klingon, and you're accentuating what makes him look like the Shadow. Nice. But there is a bit of a caveat on using this hat. Here's a test shot that I did. I did this just to send a picture to somebody, and I noticed there was some bluing around the ears. So when I took off the hat, this is what I saw. The dye from the hat had leached into the vinyl head. This was more or less a test head, so I really wasn't that worried about it. So as a precaution, I put a satin finish around the forehead, the ears, the hair, the whole top of the head basically, anywhere the hat touched the head. I think that should kind of keep it at bay, but I'm going to keep an eye on it just the same. All right, the head's taken care of. Now we need a body. For that, I'm going to go with a hybrid. I'm going to use the top half of this Type 1 body and the lower half of this Type 2 body. I modified this pelvis as an adapter. So that takes care of the head and the body. Now the clothes. For the cape, I'm going to go with this one. This is from a Charlie Flat Dracula figure that came out in the 90s. I used one of these a few episodes back on my AHI Dracula. This time, though, I'm going to remove the collar and the liner. For the pants, I'm just going to go with these. These are just standard black pants. Same for the shoes. These are just reproductions that I got from CTVT, as well as these black gloves. I actually had something different in mind for this, but for now, these are fine. I could always revisit it if I want to change it, but for now, they're fine. I saved the best for last, the coat. I got a couple of these a few years back from a company called Castaway Toys. They're not in business anymore, but I saw these when they were selling them, and I thought, you could always use a trench coat. There wasn't too many places where you can get any of those. These were good coats. They were well made. The problem was that they only came in one color. They could be dyed, but only really light colors like yellow or light blue or something like that. Nothing dark. Because when you tried to dye them in a dark color, the white threads, the stitching, stood out like a sore thumb. I had the same problem with the first coat that I had, and I really screwed it up. So I was kind of gun shy about using this one. So I kind of put it away. But I ran into the same problem with another coat. So what I ended up doing was just taking the stitching out. Just out of the front, though, not out of the back, or that coat would have fallen apart. I also took off the pockets and I added the 4 buttons and a snap. And this time I learned from my past mistakes. Instead of trying to dye this black, I went with graphite. It's a charcoal gray. I've used this before, and I think you get much better results without all this stitching. Okay, finally, we have all the parts. Let's put it together and see what we got. All right, I can live with this. I'm very happy with it. I'm happy with the body and the cape. I guess maybe you could go for a little bit of thinner material in the cape. I kind of wanted that vintage look. I mean, I guess you could go for something thinner, maybe something silkier or something, but I wasn't really going for that. I tried to keep it simple. This is actually the second version that I've done, and I'm glad I was able to get all the kinks out. Speaking of kinks, I really like the way the coat came out too. The color kind of matches the cape pretty good, considering that it's not really black. It was a hard road to get there, but we got there. Not quite black, but close enough. I really wish Castaway sold them in different colors. I think my favorite part of this figure, though, has to be the head. The way the hat and the scarf all came together with the Klingon. I think it just came out great. I never would have thought a Klingon head would make a great shadow until now, but here we are. I'm glad it was a Klingon head, though. I think that even makes it look more vintage and keeps it in the family. For those of you out there who don't know a lot about the character, you should look into it. Shadow's pretty cool, and there's tons of stuff out there. He's been around since the 30s. In fact, the character of Batman actually owes a lot to the Shadow, which makes him one of my favorite characters, and one that I'm glad to have in my collection. Well, I guess that about wraps it up for this episode. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe, share, comment. I'd love to hear from you. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, always remember and never forget, think outside the box.